Okay, Michael, what makes you the right person to talk about sexual strategies in a relationship?
Well, there are a lot of people who know about sexuality in this world, and I like to think I'm one of them. I've been writing, I'm a journalist. I'm not a doctor or psychologist or sex therapist. I'm a journalist. And for the last 52 years, I have covered sexuality, sex research, and sex therapy for national magazines, and I've written 3 sex guide books, and I currently write the All About Sex blog for psychologytoday.com, and that I've been posting twice a month for the last 17 years, and I've amassed 62 million views. So, I don't claim to know everything about sex, but I've studied it
Hmm.
for a long time. I interviewed many of the leading people in the field many times, and and there's no real secret to giving sex advice. I mean, sex is actually fairly simple. It's just our culture that has littered it with all these landmines that people step
Yeah.
on and blow themselves up.
Hmm. God. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's obviously a long time. 52 years. That's that's a long time. Studying kind of like one field. So I guess so much of your knowledge of this really comes from talking to people that are in the field and just talking about it from like many different angles, with like sex therapists and stuff like that, or like who specifically do you interview to to have more information on this?
Well, mostly I read the sex literature in the
Uh-huh.
scientific literature. And there are 6 journals that are devoted to sexuality. I read them and I report
Hmm.
on studies that I find interesting. I am acquainted with leading sex researchers in the United States and Canada, and I've talked with them frequently. I have lots of friends who are sex therapists. I mean, I'm a sex person, I'm in the sex field. And
Yeah.
like I said, I don't claim to know everything. But I've certainly focused on sexuality for a long time, and I follow the literature
Hmm.
more closely actually than most sex therapists do.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's exactly why I got you in here, because I think this is a really important topic. And as you spoke about, we live in a culture that has kind of like really turned this really natural phenomenon into something that can be, like perceived in a way that's quite, like negative, right? Which is what leads to many of the problems that people have when it comes down to talking about their sex life with their partners. So, spinning off that, obviously, with your expertise, the main barrier that we really have when it comes down to talking about sexual strategies is the fact that people are uncomfortable, right? So
Right.
aside from culture, working with people, what are the main things that cause that discomfort? Because we can't talk about sexual strategies if people aren't, even like comfortable in the first place to talk about sex, right? So like where do those like feelings of discomfort stem from in your experience working with people?
Well, I think most people are uncomfortable, feel uncomfortable revealing the most intimate details of their lives. So, for
Yeah.
example, a lot of people are very uncomfortable talking about money, their personal wealth, because that's very intimate and they think it's nobody's business. And so they don't talk about it. Sex is very similar. Sex is very fundamental to being human, but all to talk about it is very self-revealing, and people are reluctant to reveal themselves. Coupled with that is that people have no models for talking about sex. If you watch
Hmm.
television, movies, streaming, whatever, no one ever talks about sex. They just have it. I mean, people just
Yeah.
jump into bed. Um, and that often happens in the first moments of a relationship, the initial hot and heavy period. But after a while, um, you got to talk about it, and most people don't. Added to that is that a lot of people grow up in families where not only is sex not discussed, but its discussion is actively discouraged. When kids ask questions about sex, the parents say, "Oh, don't talk about that."
Hmm.
And so the message that people get is that sexuality is this taboo subject. Um, and so they go looking for answers. And if you're a man, um, you go to pornography. And I have nothing against porn being legal and available. My beef with porn is the message that it broadcasts, which is that sex is all about women worshiping men's penises.
Hmm.
And pornography is all about fellatio, cocksucking, and intercourse, both of which involve the penis. And obviously, the penis is very important to men for sexuality. And I've got nothing against men having a lot of penile stimulation. That's fine.
Hmm.
But a lot of men don't understand women's sexuality at all. A lot of men think that women have orgasms during intercourse. Very few women have orgasms during intercourse. They need direct clitoral stimulation, and most women prefer oral sex. Get it?
Yeah.
So the level of general ignorance about sexuality in Western culture is very upsetting and frankly shocking to me. That something that is so fundamental to life is so obscured and obfuscated behind all kinds of cultural weirdness.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Now, you did mention obviously, something similar. Well, not quite so similar, but there's like a similar factor in terms of the feeling of like discomfort. People have a hard time talking about money as well, right? Because they feel like, oh, that's something that they shouldn't be talking about.
Yeah, it's
But
personal.
like,
They
yeah,
think
absolutely,
it's personal.
absolutely, absolutely. Now, in a relationship, that's not good, right? Because if you can't talk about your finances or sex, you're gonna run into some long term issues, because these are
Correct.
two fundamental aspects of a long term relationship, right? Now,
Absolutely.
exactly. So, in your experience, what have you noticed? Like, what happens when a couple does not have the ability to be open about their needs and desires for sex?
Well, they're unhappy and frustrated. And some people can live with that frustration and others can't. And so
Hmm.
that frustration is what, around a number of subjects, uh, often desire differences, is what sends frustrated, often desperate couples into sex therapy. They say, "We've got this problem, and we can't talk about it, and we need to talk about it. So please help us." But most people don't go into sex therapy. Most people just sort of stumble through their sex lives, um, often frustrated and upset, but they don't know what to do about it and they don't know where to go. So, some people read books. I mean, you go on Amazon, there's, probably 10,000 books about sex out there, not just the three that I wrote. And so people look for information however they can. And sometimes they find good information and sometimes they don't. And sometimes their sex lives get better and sometimes they get worse. Um, and the good news is that when people start talking about sex or people go into sex therapy, overwhelmingly, people get better. People's sex lives improve. And that's the big payoff. Yes, it is difficult to talk about sex. I mean, I've been married 56 years,
Huh,
and it's
that's
hard
unheard
for
of
me,
nowadays.
and I'm a sex expert. It's hard for me to talk about sex with my wife. And we do
Uh-huh.
talk about it
Yeah.
and have, for half a century, but it's not easy. But the good news is that if you do talk about it, if you do seek good resources, um, sex almost always improves.
Hmm. Now, is the main source of frustration and unhappiness going to be the same for men and women, or is it a bit different? Like, for example, men sometimes might feel like they're not being desired, or they're not worthy of like being respected and stuff like that if they're not able to kind of get the sex they want, or on like a biological level, like they're just not able to get that sensation. But like in general, like what is the main factor of frustration? Is it the same for both, or is it like different? Because I'm going to assume it's going to be different, no?
Well, it's very important to understand that everyone, every individual on earth is sexually unique.
Mm-hmm.
That is the only generalization about sex that is universally true. Everyone is sexually unique. So when you take one sexually unique person and you pair them up with another sexually unique person, you get two people who are sexually unique and don't know the little quirks and foibles of the other person. And so there's only one way to learn that, and that's to talk about it.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, most people are reluctant to do that. Now, some men, there are certain patterns, and one of the main pattern that women express is tremendous frustration with the fact that men don't understand women's sexuality. Men think intercourse is what gets women off. No, it doesn't. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
intercourse is wonderful. It's a wonderful way to be close to your partner. It feels great. And that's how men have orgasms during intercourse or during oral sex. Um, but women, very few women have orgasms during intercourse. And very few men understand that women, the vast majority of women, require gentle, playful, leisurely, direct caresses of the clitoris, the little nub of tissue that sits outside the vagina and above it. And that is the clitoris is women's analogy to the head of the penis. It is filled with erotically sensitive nerves, and that's what gets women off. So if men are not going down on their lovers, if men are not caressing their lovers' clitorises, those women are going to wind up frustrated and pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of men just don't know. And they think, well, what am I doing wrong? On porn, the guys do this and do what I'm doing, and the women seem to love it. Well, don't believe everything you see on porn.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, yeah, this is really interesting. So, like, speaking of women, like in your article, you mentioned that working with sex therapists for more than, I guess, 4 decades. You mentioned in your article, you've kind of come to realize that oftentimes it's women that tend to want sex more often in a relationship, right? And in the article, you mentioned more than half the time, if that's correct. Yeah.
Yes, the
So,
cultural assumption. The cultural
yeah.
assumption is that men are lusty horn dogs who can't get enough and are always ready to fuck.
Hmm.
And the myth continues that women are more demure and shy and retiring and very much need to be coaxed into bed. That is true of many, many couples. But just as many couples, it's not true. And among couples who seek sex therapy for desire differences are the number one sexual complaint of long-term couples. The media is all about erection problems. No, among long-term couples, the main beef is desire difference. One wants to do it more than the other. And people assume it's always going to be the man who wants to do it more. No. There are plenty of women who have more libido than the men in their lives. And if you talk to sex therapists, they will tell you that among couples who come in for sex therapy, somewhere between a third and a half of them, it's the woman who wants more sex, not the man. And
Mm.
there's a wonderful movie about this called Hope Springs with Meryl Streep and Tommy Lee Jones. as the unhappy couple and Steve Carell as their sex therapist. And it's a
Hmm.
comedy. It's a romantic comedy. It has a happy ending. It's a wonderful movie. It's a lot of fun. And Tommy Lee Jones and Meryl Streep play an older couple, and he has retired from sex. He's done with it. But she doesn't want to be done with it. And that is true of many, many couples. Um, and that's why the blog post that I wrote about the difference between spontaneous sex and planned sex has to do with the fact that desire differences are the number one complaint that couples have, and sexual frequency should be negotiated between couples so they can decide how often they're going to do it and what works for both of them. And you may not get exactly what you want. You're going to have to compromise because there's another person involved. But there's only one way to resolve desire differences, and that's to talk about it and come up with a compromise frequency and then
Hmm.
schedule it on your calendar.
Hmm. Yeah, so we will talk more in depth about that, like spontaneous sex versus planned sex and just how to talk about it. But just before we do dive into that, just to get a bit more clear, what is it that normally causes women to want sex more in a heterosexual type relationship? Is it just the fact that they tend to release more bonding hormones during sex, or is it an age thing? Because I've read things where it mentions that women tend to kind of have more of a desire for sex as they get a bit older into their late 20s, 30s, and I guess 40s. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've read. So, but like, what causes that increased desire? Because again, as you mentioned, the stigma worldwide is the complete opposite.
Well, the first thing is for me to reiterate what I said earlier, which is that everyone is sexually unique.
Hmm.
And so you have to be very careful when you make generalizations about
Yeah.
sex, because they can apply to a lot of people and then at the same time not apply to a lot of other people.
Yeah.
What makes women who they are sexually? It's just who they are. It's the same thing that makes men who they are sexually. Now, our sexuality is governed to some extent by biology, by our hormones. It is governed to some extent by society, our social expectations of how sex should work. But beyond that, behind closed doors in the bedroom, it's just two people with different
Mm.
feelings and different needs who need to acquaint the partner with their unique sexuality and their desires and needs, and hope that the two of them can mesh and live with each other long term. Um, so there's no it I'm reluctant to make too many generalizations
Yeah.
because they are not that's not the way to attack this question. The way
Hmm.
is to realize that everyone is who they are,
Okay.
and you got to talk about who you are.
Yeah, yeah, no worries. So obviously, it is really personal, right? And as you mentioned, individuals are sexually unique. So in that case, let's kind of get into like the main point of this episode. If you are dealing with two people that are struggling to talk about their needs and their desires with their partners, what are some strategies that you would give them to get started on that path to kind of get to a place where they can get more comfortable just talking about various strategies that they can use to maintain excitement as they go on, like in their long term relationship.
Well, the first thing that any couple should realize is if they're struggling with desire differences, they are not alone. This is the number one complaint of
Mm.
long-term relationships. And it is the number one reason why couples consult sex therapists. Desire differences. That's what it's all about. Um, Once you understand that desire differences are quite common, um, you can, if you go to sex therapy, the therapist is going to, explore your sexual history and all that kind of stuff. But when you come right down to it, the therapist is going to say, well, if you're going to live together reasonably comfortably, you have to decide on a compromise frequency. And sex therapists almost universally recommend scheduling it on calendars. Now, if you, the negotiation is very difficult because it's hard. Say somebody wants sex every day and somebody else wants sex once a month. You can't just take the average and start doing it every other day.
Yeah.
So it's important for couples to understand that while in every age group, couple sex varies from none at all to daily or more. And that's independent of age. I mean, there are young people who have no sex, and there are older people who have a lot of sex. So yes, young people tend to have more sex than older people, but not necessarily. And so you want to, there's just to give us, people want to know if they're normal, if they're like most people. So the sex surveys, a large number of sex surveys in the United States that have been conducted by the best research public polling organizations in the country. For example, the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago has done several of these, and sex researchers at Indiana University have done several. And what they find is that for couples from like age 20 to around age 40 or 45, the most typical partner sex frequency is once a week. Like I said, young people in that age group can have sex from not at all to every day or more, but the most typical frequency is about once a week. For older couples, again, some of them have no sex, some of them have sex every day, but the most typical frequency is 2 to 3 times a month. And so once couples understand that the most typical frequency is somewhere between 2 and 4 times a month, then they can talk about what they would like to do. Can they work with 2 or 4 times a month? And most couples can, some can't. Some people absolutely insist that they have to have sex every day. Some people absolutely insist that they're done with partner sex and they don't want it at all. Well, in those relationships, that may end the relationship. It probably won't, but it might. But the key thing is that if couples really want to stay together and they want to enjoy each other's intimate company, chances are they're going to fall somewhere in the once a month, twice a month, 3, 4, 5 times a month, in that range. And then sex therapists invite couples to declare, well, I could live with this. And the other one says, well, I can't live with that, but I could live with this. And eventually you thrash out a compromised frequency. And then sex therapists universally urge couples to calendar them, have sex dates. The thing about sex dates is that the lower libido partner always says, well, what if we have a sex date and I'm not in the mood? And the answer to that is that after the hot and heavy period, when partners are almost always in the mood, after that ends, when that usually ends within 6 months to a year and a half, after that, a lot of people aren't in the mood. And you don't have to be in the mood for sex to start having sex. What generally happens, particularly with women, although this happens with men too, but it's been most documented in women, is that when sex begins, people feel kind of sexually neutral. It's not like they're lusting for their partner. It's not like that they want to rip their clothes off. They might be into it, but might not. And then what happens is that if there's kissing and hugging and touching and tender endearments, as intimacy evolves, people get more into it. And our culture believes that sex that desire comes first, that you feel desire and then you have sex. Actually, for a whole lot of people, sex comes first, and as it evolves, as it happens, they start to feel desire. So you don't have to be consumed with desire to start making love. And so when you schedule sex, the lower desire partner might not be in the mood when on a sex date night, but with enough kissing and touching and holding,
Mm.
all of a sudden they start feeling, oh, this is nice. I like this. Let's continue.
Yeah.
So it's not like sex. Real sex is not like sex in the movies, where people are just filled with desire for one another and rip each other's clothes off. No, a lot of times people begin feeling sexually neutral, and good sex produces desire that ultimately leads to sexual satisfaction.
Hmm. Got it. Okay, so great. So basically, what you're saying is, first of all, you have to understand that you're not alone, right? That this is the most common problem in long-term relationships. And
Right.
then it's important to like understand the norm. Not saying that you have to do it, but like it's good to understand the norm so you can work with those numbers, right? You mentioned if the couple tends to be a bit younger, in general, it's once a week, and if they're a bit older, it's 2 to 4 times per month.
Right. Now,
Correct?
a
Hmm.
lot of
In
people,
general.
yeah, a lot of people have more sex on vacation. A lot of people
Yeah.
have sex in hotels. A lot of
Hmm.
people have less sex if, one of them is ill or injured or something. I mean,
Yeah.
life does intrude. And so
Yeah.
people need to be flexible. But in general, it's good to work with frequencies on the order of 1 to 4 or 5 times a month, and see how you feel about it.
Got it. Great. Yeah. And then you also mentioned that, hey, if you do take the route of planned sex, which is what I guess some sex therapists do tend, uh, to like advocate, you want to use a lot of like non-sexual touching and like affection to kind of create an atmosphere that can get the person in the mood on that day if they're not in the mood, right?
Right, right.
Got it.
And a lot of it is, candlelight, music, lingerie,
Mm-hmm.
clean sheets, privacy. Um, a lot of people have conditions
Yeah.
that help or hinder their sexual responsiveness. And so those conditions, couples should discuss their conditions, what they need to feel aroused and into it, and then do that for each other.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Now, in contrast, you also mentioned something called spontaneous sex, which is something that people tend to do in general during the first 6 to 18 months of their relationship,
Right.
during like the honeymoon phase, right? Now, obviously, there are many benefits that come with spontaneous sex. Like it can be really exciting, right? Which is why they constantly show it in the movies. It's more like theatrical in a sense, right? Now,
Yes.
are there ways to kind of draw the benefits of spontaneous sex and bring it into um, the strategy of planned sex, or are they both like just different? You kind of have to take a certain path. Because I'm pretty sure most people they would want to bring some elements from spontaneous sex. Like, you know what I mean?
Um, well, spontaneous sex happens at the front end of relationships early on.
Yeah.
As relationships become more committed and long term, libido generally declines. And if two people have the same decline, there's no problem. But almost always, their libidos change differently, and you wind up with desire differences. Now, how can you return that feeling of spontaneity to a sexual relationship? The best way is to have um, reintroduce spontaneity and surprise into the relationship, reintroduce novelty,
Yeah.
do something new, do something different. Sex is always better in hotels. Why? Because hotels are something different. It's doing it in a different place, apart from the associations at home that may be a turnoff, like, laundry piling up, dishes in the sink. At a hotel, you don't have that. And so hotels are different, and
Hmm.
that can become erotic. Um, any novelty can be
Yeah.
can do that. A new restaurant, a new hike, going somewhere new, doing anything different, making love at a different time of day in a different place, whatever. They all novelty releases dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain.
Yeah.
Novelty releases a chemical in the brain that turns people on. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter of pleasure. And so when people are feeling more pleasure, they're generally more open to focusing that in an erotic direction.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really interesting. So basically, you can plan, the sex as you mentioned, but again, introduce novelty. Like you could do it at a different time or in a different location, or just take like a different approach. You know, not to get
Right.
too graphic, but you know what I mean. You could take like a different approach to how you want to have sex to just not have it be so repetitive and same thing, same time, same place, and eventually that will get old, right? So
Yeah.
that's a really interesting strategy.
So
Now,
one thing
go ahead.
when people have sex dates, one thing you can do is not just jump into bed. One, a lot of sex therapists recommend that people trade foot massages before they even get into bed. Foot massages are very relaxing, very much of a turn on. And if you
Hmm.
give your honey a glass of wine and a foot massage and play nice music and the candlelight is lit, that helps create the mood and
Yeah.
gets people from feeling neutral about sex to feeling into it and feeling pleasure,
Hmm.
which is what it's all about.
Yeah, yeah. So it seems like a lot of it, is pretty much what happens outside of the bedroom or when you're having sex, right? So much of the activities that you do outside, which we'll get a bit more into that because I do want to talk about that. Now, speaking of planned sex, obviously we spoke about novelty and making sure you can keep those elements of spontaneous sex to keep it exciting, right? Are there any drawbacks? I mean, like, are there like like any other drawbacks that people should keep in mind when it comes to planned sex, and what would you tell them if they wanted to overcome those drawbacks?
Well, first, let me talk about the benefits of planned sex before the
Yeah,
drawbacks. The benefits of
yeah.
it are that when you decide on a compromised frequency and you schedule it on your calendar, it instantly ends the nightly struggle over tonight, tonight, tonight. No, 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 I'm not in the mood. So a
Hmm.
lot of couples, flail each other with requests. So the person with the higher libido always feels turned down and beleaguered. They feel frustrated and beleaguered. All they hear is the word no. The person who has the lower libido, all they hear is gimme, 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 and they feel frustrated and besieged. And this causes tensions in the relationship that spill over into other aspects of it beyond sex. When people schedule sex, they know sex is only going to happen when it's there on the calendar. And that relieves a lot of tension. It relieves the nightly tensions. There's no more tonight, tonight, tonight. No, no, no. None of that. Everybody knows when sex is going to happen. The other thing that happens in desire differences is that non-sexual affection drops out of the relationship. And by non-sexual affection, I mean hugs, friendly kisses, little pinches on the butt, anything that is physical touching drops out of the relationship because the person with the greater libido is always initiating that, always hugging, always wanting to kiss, hoping that it'll lead to more and they'll get lucky. The person who has the lower libido is always shying away from non-sexual affection because they don't want to give the wrong impression. They don't want to
Yeah.
um, uh, have the other person start thinking, oh, we're going to do it. When sex is scheduled, you can be non-sexually affectionate without any implication beyond that. You can go up to your lover, you hug them, you kiss them, and
Yeah.
you both know that that's all it is. It is non-sexual affection because you don't have a sex date scheduled then. Now, if you want to have some non-sexual affection right before there's a scheduled sex date, fine. But people really value non-sexual affection. You know what? And the surveys show that when you ask people what kind of non-sexual affection do you like most, a substantial proportion of the population says, I like to cuddle while we're watching TV.
Mm.
And if you have a big desire difference, people don't cuddle at the TV. But once you have scheduled sex, planned sex, you can cuddle all you want. And it really,
Yeah.
um, it's not sex, but it is very satisfying personally. Touch is a wonderful, is just a great gift of our senses. And gentle touch stimulates special nerves in the skin called
Hmm.
tactile fibers. And when you gentle touch, massage like strokes are calming and they make people happier. And when you're happier, you're generally happier to have sex.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you mentioned, the benefits are obviously, first of all, it gets rid of all of like the unspoken subtle advances and like all the, the unspoken clutter that comes with not knowing when you're gonna have sex,
Right.
which is obviously a big problem when there's a big difference in the libido of the two individuals that are involved, right?
Right.
And then again, not yeah,
You asked about any drawbacks to scheduled.
yeah, that was the follow up.
Not
Yeah.
really. I mean,
Oh,
scheduled
really?
is sex therapists almost universally recommend it and endorse it and encourage it. Now, the hassle with scheduled sex is that uh, you can have a sex date and then something comes up. You've got to do something in your business. You're somebody gets sick. Your parents are having problems. People have to be flexible, and
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
if you schedule a sex date and something comes up and it can happen, roll it over to another night. The real problem happens when people agree to scheduled sex, when the lower libido partner agrees to scheduled sex and then does not follow through. Because then
Mm.
you've got not only a desire difference, but you have one of them misleading the other,
Yeah.
which is difficult. And in that kind of a situation, I would suggest consulting a sex therapist to thrash it out.
God, yeah. So it seems like I guess the main two things you have to be aware of is just be flexible when you need to be, right? So like it's not like it has to happen on that day. Obviously, if there's like an emergency, just allow for some flexibility, right? And don't try and force it too much. And then no misleading, because that's just like it just won't hurt the sexual dynamic of that relationship. It'll also hurt like your ability to trust the word of that person, right?
Right,
Because like
right,
that'll carry over into like the non-sexual aspects of that relationship, right? So
right. People
that's
in a
mhm.
relationship, it's imperative to follow through on your agreements and not renege on your agreements.
Mhm.
And if you have agreed to have sex 3 times a month, it behooves you to follow through and have sex 3 times a month.
Mhm. Got it. And then you also mentioned, certain aspects of like going to new restaurants and going on different hikes as a way to introduce novelty into the relationship to keep it exciting, right?
Correct.
Now, and then you also mentioned like non-sexual affection, hugging and friendly kisses and stuff like that. Are there any other non-sexual forms of affection or non-sexual strategies that people should look into if they want to, maintain or increase their sexual enthusiasm towards their partner? Or would you say that those two are like the main things that you have to worry about or just keep in
Well,
mind?
I like to define sex broadly as pleasure associated with touch.
Really?
And a
That's
lot of
interesting.
people, and there are all kinds of ways to have pleasure associated with touch. I mean, people can take massage class together and learn how to massage one another, which is great non-sexually and also can help with sex.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of people, kink is much more popular than people think. BDSM, bondage, discipline, and sadomasochism. People go, "Oh my God, whips and chains." No, it's not like that. A lot of BDSM is just play. It's theater. And if you look at the popularity of 50 Shades of Grey, I mean,
Yeah.
50 Shades of Grey novels are one of the top selling pieces of fiction in the history of the world.
Yeah.
And the 3 movies, I mean, BDSM is much more popular than a lot of people think. The surveys, there's been a great deal of research on this, and the surveys show that about 1/3 of sexually active couples incorporate some elements of BDSM into their sex play. They're into a little spanking, a little hair pulling, a little bit of domination and submission, where one person tells the other what to do. Um, so it's not, kink is not um, foreign to human experience. Kink is a lot of people are into it, and there are kinky sex clubs and groups in pretty much every zip code in the United States. I mean, if you are interested, you put BDSM in any locale in America or Canada into a search engine, and you're going to get dozens of hits of things that are going on in that area. So,
Hmm.
kink is something to try that a lot of couples like. Um, and beyond that, be creative. What do you like? And talk to your partner about what you both like and see what you want to do. Some
Hmm.
people, some people like to make love on a beach. Some people like to have sex in cars. Whatever floats your boat, do it.
Hmm. Okay, so that ties back into the novelty aspect of things, right?
Correct.
With kink, and again, you kind of mentioned that sex is kind of broad for you in terms of like your definition, which is just a pleasure that's associated with touch. But like, like aside from the sexual energy aspect, are there like non-sexual activities on the outside, that people can look into and take more part in, like activities or just certain things that
Well,
people can do to increase that chemistry or enthusiasm they have for one
I would
another,
say
not necessarily sexually.
I would say that what you're talking about is really courtship. Courtship is very important. And now people are willing to engage in courtship, which means putting yourself out to make the other person happy. That happens in the beginning of relationships, but it often drops out after a while. And that's disappointing because people feel like, doesn't my partner care about me? Doesn't my partner
Hmm.
want to please me? Um, One of the great insights into relationships is that in successful relationships, courtship never ends. You're always courting your partner, even if you're married 50 years. You're courting people. You're courting your partner because you want to please your partner and you want to do things for your partner, and you hope your partner does things for you. There's an exercise that a lot of sex therapists use, which is called surprise dates. And a surprise date is the couple
Hmm.
decides on a time period, like, Tuesday evening. And one of them takes responsibility for planning what they're going to do on Tuesday evening. And the other pledges to go along with it, unless they just simply can't. But the idea is to be game and be willing to try something new. And
Hmm.
those secret dates are often a way to have a lot of fun together, and it's a good segue into some fun in the bedroom too.
Got it. Yeah, so it seems like just novelty across the board, sexually and non-sexually is the key here, just to kind of maintain that enthusiasm. So I guess that's kind of the main pillar that people should operate from if they're looking to kind of, again, as we spoke about, maintain that enthusiasm and not lose it, and then find themselves in a place where they're stuck and they don't know how to kind of move forward.
Right.
Got it. Okay, great, Mr. Castleman. We're slowly coming to an end here. Now, obviously, this is a topic that many people want to know about, but as you know, they talk about it in like or they don't even really talk about it. Many people, right? If you were to give them resources that they can go to kind of learn more about this in depth, what would those resources be?
Well, humbly, I would recommend my most recent sex guide, which is called Sizzling Sex for Life. Sizzling Sex for Life. And it is
Yeah.
available on Amazon. And it talks about all of the common sexual issues and how to deal with them at every stage of life, from the sexual implications of circumcision during infancy to the growing phenomenon of sex in nursing homes and everything in between, including a big section on how to resolve desire differences. So that's one thing I'd recommend. The other thing is that my blog on psychologytoday.com, it's called All About Sex, and you can search All About Sex, psychologytoday.com, and you'll find it. And beyond that, I would say that if people are bothered, if people are frustrated, if people feel like sex is a problem in their lives, please consider consulting a sex therapist. And the way to find one is to go to the American Association of Sex Counselors, Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, AASECT, American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. And you can find a therapist on that website. And there are sex therapists all over the United States. I mean, they tend to cluster in metropolitan areas, but even in rural areas, they are available. And if you don't have a sex therapist near you, you can get sex therapy on Zoom. So anyone who is frustrated enough to think, I need help, if you feel that, I would urge you to have a brief course of sex therapy. It usually doesn't take that long. The typical sex therapy runs for about, a couple of months of weekly sessions. So those would be my suggestions.
Got it. That's wonderful. And if you can actually send me your links, I will just put it down below, and people can have like a quicker access to go and check it out, so they can get more educated on this and avoid sexual frustration and all the negative things that stem from that.
I will send you my links.
Absolutely. All right, Mr. Castleman, thank you so much. This was wonderful. Obviously, it's kind of a odd topic for a lot of people, but I really enjoy this because this is obviously really important. And hopefully you continue to do more work on this, because I enjoy your work a lot. So thank you so much.
Hey, Shaq, thanks for having me on. It was delightful talking with you.
No problem. Wonderful. All right. You have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.